You're just not essential. That's how he cut my hours. No warning, no email. Just a brand new schedule with my name. Erased. I looked at that piece of paper and I smiled. Because what he didn't know was that I had just been approved for a small business loan. 3 months later, I walked back into that store not to ask for my job back, but to buy the very franchise he was so proud. Oh, my name is Maya Ellison. I live in Chandler, Arizona. And for 4 years, I was what you'd call a model employee. I opened the store at 6 a.m. sharp. I closed it down after the last customer left. I trained new hires, cleaned up messes no one else wanted to touch, covered shifts when people bailed last minute, smiled when my feet ached. And the thanks I got, my name erased from the schedule like I never existed. I still remember the morning it happened. It was a Monday. I brought in coffee for the team, like always. But the assistant manager, Kyle, looked up at me like I was a stranger. He pointed to the clipboard by the door. That clipboard I'd checked 100 times before. "You're not on here anymore," he said. Flat voice, no eye contact. Just that clipboard, and silence. I thought it was a mistake, so I waited for Howard, the owner. A man who used to shake my hand every Friday. A man who once told me I had grit. He walked in, chewing gum, sunglasses on indoors. Didn't even stop when I called his name. "Howard, my schedule's missing." He didn't flinch, didn't blink, just kept walking, then tossed over his shoulder. "You're just not essential." That was it. 4 years, gone, just like that. Not a warning, not a conversation, not even a thank you. I stood there, holding a lukewarm coffee tray meant for people who no longer looked me in the eye. And I felt heat rising in my chest, not anger, not sadness, but clarity. Because what Howard didn't know was that I'd already started something. 2 months earlier, after a night shift, I sat at my kitchen table half asleep, still in uniform, and filled out a draft for a small business loan. I didn't think I'd actually use it. It was a dream, a someday thing. But I kept going, bit by bit. On weekends, late nights, on breaks in the supply closet, research, market analysis, draft menus, budgets. I even had a name, M.E. Ventures. Short for my initials, short for me. Now I had a reason to hit submit. I walked out of that store and didn't slam the door and didn't cry in the parking lot. I just went home, pulled up the application, and finished what I started. In the days that followed, I sold the spare couch in my garage, canceled Netflix, cut down to rice and beans. Every dollar went into the plan. I called the SBA office in Phoenix, sat through a 4-hour webinar on franchise ownership, met with a local advisor. I turned my bedroom wall into a vision board, post-it notes, maps, projected earnings. I didn't tell a soul, not even my sister. I wanted this one. For me. And then, like some cruel joke, I got a text from a coworker, a group pic, them celebrating a relaunch at the store, new hires, balloons. Howard grinning, front and center. No one mentioned me, not even a "wish you were here." But I wasn't angry. I just saved the photo and taped it to my vision board. A reminder that sometimes the people who cut you out end up lighting the fuse you needed all along. That week, my loan got approved. $50,000. Enough to look, enough to start. And that's exactly what I did. It took me 3 weeks to find the right listing. I'd combed through business for sale platforms, local classifieds, even late-night Facebook groups full of broken dreams and second chances. I bookmarked nearly a dozen franchises. Most were too expensive. Some were shady. One was just sad. But then, one quiet Wednesday morning, it appeared, a posting on Craigslist barely visible, hidden between yard sale ads and busted lawnmowers. Franchise opportunity, quick sale, motivated seller, Tempe area. It was vague, no pictures, just a phone number and a single line Stack Bites location available. Call for details. My stomach twisted. Stack Bites, as in the exact chain I used to work for, as in the same one that erased me like gum off the sidewalk. I hesitated, then called. The voice on the other end, familiar, too familiar. Hello? I froze, then said the only thing I could manage. Hi, I'm calling about the franchise listing. There was a pause. Then, that voice I knew too well. Yeah. You looking to buy? I'm trying to get out quick. Location's solid, just needs better management. It's been a rough quarter. It was him, Howard. Same gum-chewing arrogance, just now tinted with desperation. He didn't recognize my voice, and I didn't tell him. I said I was interested, asked for the books. He emailed over the numbers that night, and when I opened the spreadsheet, I nearly choked on my breath. Revenue had plummeted, reviews were terrible, staffing costs were up, sales down. His flagship location, the one I once helped run like clockwork, was sinking, and he was bailing. I didn't sleep that night. I stared at those numbers, alternating between fury and amusement, because the universe had just placed the exact same business that once kicked me out into my hands. I met with a lawyer the next morning. We structured the deal clean and quiet. My name wouldn't appear until closing. Everything would funnel through M.E. Ventures. I didn't want revenge. I wanted ownership. I wanted peace and power, and my place back on the map. We scheduled the site visit for Friday. When I walked in, the place looked like a ghost of what it used to be. Flickering lights, greasy floors, empty napkin dispensers. Customers were scarce, and the ones there looked miserable. A kid at the counter asked me if I was a health inspector. I almost laughed. Howard gave me the tour himself, still chewing gum, still talking like he owned the world. He pointed out where he upgraded the fryer, bragged about his new loyalty app that no one used. I nodded politely, took notes, never broke character. He handed me the keys to the walk-in freezer at one point, like he was passing down an empire. I looked him in the eye, said thank you, and we didn't know who I was. Back in my car, I sat in silence. Then I screamed, not in anger, but in victory, in absolute disbelief that I was this close. The purchase closed 10 days later. I wired the funds, signed every paper, and his earring store became mine. The next morning, I walked in before dawn, wore the same sneakers I used to mop floors in, but now I had the master key. I changed the locks, replaced the uniforms, tore down the dusty posters, ordered fresh menus, scheduled deep cleaning. I called back every worker I remembered who'd been decent, kind, hardworking, people Howard had let go or pushed out. They showed up that weekend wide-eyed, confused until they saw me. And then they understood. We held a team meeting right in the center of the empty dining room. I stood where Howard used to bark orders, but I didn't bark. I told them the truth, that the place was under new ownership, that it was going to be different, that no one was just anything here. I didn't tell them the full story, not yet, because this revenge wasn't about rubbing it in. It was about rewriting the story. I reopened Stack Bites Tempe under M.E. Ventures within 3 weeks. We held a quiet launch, no balloons, no empty promises, just fresh sandwiches, fair pay, and second chances. Business started slow, but word spread. The service was better. The food was cleaner. People smiled. We got our first 5-star Yelp review within a month. I printed it, framed it, hung it in the hallway. 2 months in, I got a call, the blocked number. It was Howard. Hey, I heard you're running that Tempe store now. I stayed silent. Looks like you're doing all right. Didn't expect that, honestly. Still, I said nothing. Then he asked, you ever think about taking on the Mesa location? I'm getting tired of the whole thing. I didn't laugh. I didn't gloat. I just replied, send me the books. And hung up, because this was just the beginning. I spent the next few days refining every detail of the operation. I wasn't just trying to run a sandwich shop. I was building something that stood for every woman who had ever been told she was not essential. I called my mentor from the business program I took last year. We sat at a coffee shop and reviewed my financial projections, step by step. She looked at the numbers, looked at me, and said, you're not just running a business, Maya. You're correcting history. That hit me, because it was true. I wasn't looking for applause. I wasn't chasing a headline. I just wanted to build a place where people mattered. 2 weeks later, a woman came in during lunch rush. She looked familiar. Turns out, she was one of the regional Stack Bites auditors who used to inspect us. She pulled me aside and said, "This place feels different, like it actually wants to be here." That night, I sat alone in the office, the same office where Howard used to toss paperwork like trash, and I finally allowed myself to cry. Not because I was broken, but because I'd made it. Through grit, through grace, through silence that spoke louder than any shout. The next morning, I updated our outdoor signage. Beneath the Stack Bites logo, in bold, clean font, I added 3 small words owned by Maya. Not to brag, not to taunt. Just to remind anyone walking in, especially myself, that I belonged here. That I had built this. That I was no longer disposable. By the end of the quarter, revenue had doubled, customer retention was up, staff turnover near 0. The same franchise that tossed me aside now had my fingerprints on every surface. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt powerful. The day I took over the Mesa location started just like any other. Except this time, I wasn't walking in as an employee, or as someone hoping to be recognized. I was walking in as the owner. Howard had sent the books, just like he promised. But this time, I took my time reviewing them. I wanted to savor it. Every flawed spreadsheet, every mistake he tried to cover with optimism. The Mesa store was bleeding money, more so than the Tempe one, but the location prime, right off the freeway, 2 blocks from a college campus. I saw what he didn't. Potential and profit with the right hands. So I said yes. We closed the deal in under 2 weeks. And just like that, I became the owner of not 1, but 2 Stack Bites franchises. It felt surreal, but I didn't have time to sit in that feeling, because the Mesa store was in worse shape than I imagined. Broken ice machines, untrained staff, a walk-in cooler that smelled like sour onions and regret. I walked behind the counter and watched 2 employees argue over sandwich orders while a customer stood waiting, arms crossed, eyebrows raised. No leadership, no clarity, no pride. I stepped in, quietly, helped make 3 orders, smiled, apologized to customers, took a mop to the floor while the staff stared. One of them finally asked, "Sorry, are you the new manager or something?" I turned around, looked him in the eyes, and said, gently, "No, I'm the new owner." Silence, but not the kind filled with awkwardness. The kind that means people are rethinking everything they assumed. I didn't fire anyone that day. Instead, I posted a new training schedule, gave everyone a raise, instituted paid breaks. They didn't believe it was real until their paychecks came in 2 weeks later. Then the shifts started filling up faster. Then they started staying late, cleaning more, smiling. Because respect changes everything. I repainted the store myself on a Sunday. My cousin helped. We picked teal and charcoal gray, bold but clean. I printed motivational quotes from real people, not CEOs, not billionaires, but women like my grandmother who raised 3 kids with a second-hand sewing machine. One quote above the sandwich station read, "What they throw away, we rebuild." Customers noticed. They took pictures, shared them online. Our Instagram page, once dead, began to breathe. A week after the reopening, I was restocking chips when Howard walked in. I knew he would. He couldn't resist seeing what had become of his empire. He glanced around. The new paint, the new staff, the new customers. Then he spotted me by the register, scanning inventory. He tilted his head, confused. "You, again?" This time I smiled. "Still not essential, Howard." He didn't answer, just stood there, hands on hips, then muttered, "Didn't think you had it in you." I stepped forward, leaned in just enough at talk, and said that's the difference between people who build and people who take credit. He didn't stay long, but the look on his face was worth every spreadsheet I studied at 2 a.m. After he left, I called an all-staff meeting, told them everything. The truth about who I was, how I started, how I ended up here. There were tears, mine and theirs. One girl named Kayla. just 19, came up to me after and whispered, "I thought people like you didn't exist. Thank you for proving me wrong." I hugged her, because I knew exactly what it felt like to believe the world only made room for loud men in expensive shoes. But not anymore. By the end of the month, Mesa's weekly sales had doubled. The district rep called to ask what I was doing differently. I told her I stopped treating workers like machines and started treating them like humans. She laughed. But I didn't, because this wasn't a gimmick. It was my life. And finally, it was working. 3 months in, we hosted a neighborhood block party, live music, sandwich samples, a free face painting booth for kids. Families who'd never stepped inside before came through the doors that day. One woman asked if she could speak to the manager. When I said I was the owner, her jaw dropped. She said, "My daughter needs to see this. A woman running her own place. It matters." And it did. That night, when we closed the store and turned off the lights, I stood alone by the door, looked out over the parking lot I used to cry in, and whispered to myself, "You did it, Maya. You really did." But deep down, I knew something else. This wasn't the end. This was the beginning of something much bigger. The following week, a local news outlet reached out. They had seen the social media buzz. A reporter named Dana wanted to do a piece on small businesses bouncing back after the pandemic. I almost said no. I wasn't used to cameras, to interviews. But then I thought about that girl Kayla, about the woman who brought her daughter, about all the people who needed to see a different story. So I said yes. We filmed the interview on a quiet Thursday morning. Dana asked me how I got started. I told her about the clipboard, about the coffee tray, about the day someone told me I wasn't essential. She leaned in and asked, "And now?" I smiled. "Now I sign the paychecks. Now I write the schedule. Now I own the doors they once closed on me." The article went viral, not millions of views, but enough. Enough to get emails from women in Ohio, Texas, North Carolina, people who said, "I needed this story." And suddenly, it didn't matter that my name wasn't famous, because what I had done quietly, fiercely, without begging for a seat was echoing through other lives. That weekend, I stood behind the counter at the Mesa store, wearing a plain black polo and a name tag that just said Maya. A girl came in, teenager, nervous. She looked around, then asked me if we were hiring. I said yes. She smiled and said, "I heard you give people a chance." I looked at her, heart full, and replied, "I do, because someone once didn't." And that's when I knew this wasn't just a comeback, it was a revolution. One sandwich at a time. By the time my third franchise opened, something had shifted. Not just in my business, but in me. I wasn't operating out of fear anymore. Not hustling to prove my worth to the people who once dismissed me. Now, I was building with intention, purpose, legacy. My newest location was in Scottsdale, a sleek space with high foot traffic and a growing population of young professionals. It was everything the Mesa store wasn't: modern, polished, and full of potential. But it wasn't the building I cared about. It was what we'd put inside it. This time, I started from scratch. New equipment. A chef consultant to help upgrade the menu. A branding team made up entirely of women and people of color. Every element, every color palette, every phrase on our signage, it all meant something. The grand opening came with no celebrity guests, no banners, no empty speeches, just food, music, and our community. As I stood under the awning that first morning, I watched a line curl around the block. Customers holding kids, teachers from the elementary school across the street, 2 firefighters in uniform, even a group of college girls taking selfies in front of our new mural. And at the center of that mural, it said, "We rise, we serve, we stay." That line wasn't just about sandwiches. It was about survival. About women like me, quiet, overlooked, finally taking space, and keeping it. The first few months were wild. Sales exceeded expectations. We hired quickly, trained harder, smiled more. But success comes with attention. One afternoon, I received an email from StackBytes Corporate. They wanted to feature me in a national spotlight campaign, Owner of the Quarter. They called it The Rise of M.E. Clever. I should have been proud, but I hesitated, because now they wanted to celebrate the same story they once ignored. The system that left me out now wanted to claim me. I spoke with my team, asked them what they thought. Kayla said, "If you do it loud. Tell the truth. Don't let them rewrite your rise." So I did. In the official interview, I didn't clean up the past. I didn't paint over what happened at the Tempe store. I said it plainly. I was cut, erased, told I wasn't essential. And now, I run 3 locations with more profit, better reviews, and lower turnover than anyone in my region. I didn't just bounce back. I bought the table they never gave me a seat at. The video got over 1 million views in 4 days. Emails poured in, offers, partnerships. Even a business school asked if I'd guest lecture. I said no to most, not because I wasn't honored, but because I knew what mattered most wasn't fame. It was presence. I wanted to be there when a 17-year-old walked into her first job interview and saw a woman who looked like her behind the desk. I wanted to be the reason someone whispered, "Maybe I can do that too." One Friday night, while closing down the Scottsdale store, I got a call. Unknown number. But I answered. "Maya, this is Howard." I paused. He cleared his throat. "I saw the article, the video. You really did it, huh?" I didn't reply. I let the silence do the talking. Then he said something I didn't expect. "I'm closing up my last store. Just wanted to say congratulations. I was wrong." Still, I said nothing. Not out of cruelty, but because some things don't need a response. He hung up, and I stood in the middle of my 3rd store, floor mopped, lights dimmed, music off. The air was still, but I wasn't. I was alive, awake, and more rooted in myself than I had ever been. Later that month, I created a fund, the Mary E. Foundation, named not for the business, but for the belief, make empowerment. We offered small grants to women looking to start food trucks, catering gigs, or pop-up cafes. No banks, no hoops, just belief. One of our first recipients was a single mom from Tucson who made tamales from her apartment kitchen. She cried when she received the check. I cried too, because her story was mine, different details, same roots. And I realized then the best revenge isn't success. It's multiplying it, sharing it, spreading it, turning it into soil where others can grow. One evening, I drove past my first store in Tempe, the one where it all started, where my name was once erased from a clipboard. It had a new owner now. I parked, walked up to the window, peered inside, and smiled, because I no longer needed it to remember who I was. I had built something far beyond it, and this time no one could take it away. The next few weeks were a blur of momentum. Local schools started calling, asking if I could speak during career day, not as some inspirational poster child, but as someone real, who made mistakes, who cried, who failed, and kept going. I told them yes. I spoke in worn-down gymnasiums and crowded classrooms, told stories about cleaning fryers at midnight and running payroll on Christmas Eve. I talked about the power of silence, not as weakness, but as strategy. And every time I looked out into those rows of young faces, I saw versions of myself. Girls who had been told they weren't enough. Boys who'd never seen a woman run something with steel in her voice and softness in her eyes. And I reminded them that success doesn't always arrive with applause. Sometimes it arrives in paperwork, in early mornings, in quiet resilience. One evening, I came home to find a letter waiting for me. It was handwritten, no return address. Inside was a simple note. "Thank you. You gave my daughter back her courage." No signature, no name, just that. And I wept, because revenge had turned into redemption, and redemption into responsibility. I wasn't just rewriting my story. I was holding the pen so others could start theirs. And maybe that's the most powerful thing of all, to be erased from one clipboard and end up on 100 others, not as an employee, but as an example. Not as a statistic, but as a spark. A reminder that being underestimated isn't the end. Sometimes, it's just the beginning. It all came full circle on a Tuesday morning. I was sitting at my usual table near the window at the Scottsdale store, iced coffee in hand. Inbox open, head already full of logistics when a woman walked in wearing a pressed navy blazer and a look that said she didn't come for a sandwich. She introduced herself as Marissa Tran, Director of Franchise Development at Stack Bites Corporate. I raised an eyebrow. She smiled and said, "We're starting a new initiative, and we want you to lead it." My first instinct was suspicion. Years ago, they didn't even know my name. Now they wanted me to help redesign their national training program. But this time, it wasn't a trap. It was an opening. They wanted to learn, and they wanted me to teach. So I said yes, but on one condition: the program would be built by people like me, women, immigrants, single moms, queer creatives, former fast food workers turned entrepreneurs, real voices, real change. They agreed. 2 months later, I stood on stage in Chicago at the Stack Bites Leadership Summit, wearing a soft gray suit I'd bought secondhand and tailored myself. No one announced me with trumpets, no flashy entrance, just a quiet nod from the moderator. And I walked up. I looked out at the room filled with district managers, executives, and regional franchisees, many of whom looked like the ones who used to ignore me in break rooms. And I told them the truth. You don't build empires by managing spreadsheets. You build them by managing dignity, respect, second chances. You don't lose good people because they're lazy. You lose them because they're invisible. And when you make someone feel seen, they'll move mountains for you. The applause wasn't thunderous, but it was real. And after, they lined up to talk, to ask questions, to listen. It was the first time I truly felt the shift, not just in my life, but in the system itself. When I got home that weekend, I walked through each of my 3 stores, said hello to the teams, checked in on everyone, left handwritten notes in the break rooms. Then I sat alone in the Tempe office, the same one Howard used to occupy like a throne, but mine had no ego. No framed quotes from men who never flipped a burger, just a photo of my mom, and a sticky note that said, "You built this? Don't shrink." Later that night, I opened my laptop, created a new document, titled it Stacking Forward, my plan to turn the entire M.E. Ventures model into a coaching network, to help others open franchises the right way, to rewrite the manual, to scale fairness. The next morning, I called Kayla into the office. She was now 21, confident, sharp, the kind of leader I used to dream of becoming. I slid a folder across the desk. Inside was paperwork, promoting her to general manager of the Mesa store. She looked up, stunned, but "I'm still learning." I smiled. "So am I. But if you wait until you feel ready, you'll never move." She cried. I did too, because passing the torch wasn't the end. It was expansion. A week later, I received another letter, typed, signed, official. Howard had filed for bankruptcy. His last store had shuttered. His name was no longer on any active location. I stared at the document, felt no victory in it, only closure. Because this journey was never about beating him. It was about becoming undeniable. The following spring, I launched a fellowship for first-time franchise owners. 10 women across the country, all with different dreams, all with fire in their chests. I mentored them personally, shared my mistakes, let them shadow my operations. One of them, a single mom from Louisiana named Brielle, texted me after her first month in business. "I used to be afraid to speak in meetings. Now I run them." And that made everything worth it. I was no longer just a business owner. I was a builder, a multiplier, a woman who had once been cut from the schedule, now creating schedules across cities. And in that truth, I found peace. The final time I visited the original Stack Bites HQ, it wasn't for business. It was for a ceremony. They were unveiling a new plaque, Voices That Changed the Company. My name was on it. Next to it was a photo me, Kayla, and 2 others from our team. Smiling, solid, seen. I didn't cry that day. I stood still, breathing, present, remembering the girl who once held a coffee tray and stood in silence while the door shut in her face, and whispering to her, gently, "We made it." A few months later, I was invited to a high school not far from where I grew up. The principal had heard about my journey and asked if I could give a commencement speech. I almost said no, I wasn't a polished speaker, and my words didn't come from podiums. But something in me whispered, do it, show up. So I did. I stood on that small stage in a borrowed blazer, facing hundreds of students draped in gowns and dreams. And I told them the truth, that failure is not a flaw, that being dismissed doesn't mean you're worthless. It means you're underestimated. And sometimes being underestimated is your greatest weapon. I told them how I built something from what others threw away, how silence isn't weakness, how walking away doesn't mean giving up. It means you're preparing to come back louder without ever raising your voice. After the ceremony, a girl with curly hair ran up to me, holding her cap tight. She said, "They told me I wasn't college material, but I got into culinary school. I want to own a cafe one day just like you." I hugged her, because I meant it when I said this wasn't just my win. It was ours. Every story I shared, every hand I held, every door I opened for someone else that was the real empire, not the buildings, not the press, but the belief we left behind in others. In the end, I didn't just buy a franchise, I rewrote the meaning of ownership. And in doing so, I reminded the world you can take away someone's hours, but you'll never erase their worth.